All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing John Vaughn. He was a captain in the U.S. Army, and he's out now, but you might remember he came on the show last year to talk about the aftermath of the Afghan withdrawal and the suicide attack at the airport in Kabul and all of that. And wrote a great piece about it for the Libertarian Institute, which we took down because he got in trouble with the bosses, but now he put back up because he's out. So you can find all that at the Libertarian Institute. And then he's got a new article, A Veteran Explains Why People Aren't Joining the Military. Welcome back to the show, John. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you very much, Scott, for having me back on.
Happy to have you here. Hey, so first of all, tell us why you joined the military in the first place and how many years you spent in and which wars you were in and so forth and what all it was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the military right out of high school. I left high school and went to West Point, or the United States Military Academy, which is the service academy that graduates soldiers into the Army. And so I kind of always knew growing up, I grew up in a conservative household in the South of Atlanta, and was kind of in an area that had a lot of veterans. And I knew I wanted to join the military because I had kind of this patriotic duty that I felt. And, you know, I was kind of the guy that, I played sports and was athletic and competitive. And I enjoyed that kind of competition and physical competitiveness. And really, I mean, frankly, like, there's not a lot of places in the, in the world where you can go and be physically intense and like do violence basically. And besides being like a cop, and I wanted to join the military so that I could fight and serve my country and do all of the above. So after graduating from West Point, I commissioned as an infantry officer because I wanted to get out there in the front lines and do the fighting. But I graduated a little bit after the kind of major waves of the war on terror. And I also went to a unit that didn't deploy to the combat zones so much, an armored unit. And so I went to Kuwait on a non-combat rotation once. And then after going to the 82nd Airborne Division, I was activated and went to Kabul last year, as you referenced, and I also deployed earlier this year to Poland as part of the reaction to the Russian invasion there. But now I'm out of the Army and glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're out too. And now, so obviously the narrative, well, first of all, the news is that recruitment is down, and they even were saying, well, forget high school, you can go with just a GED, although I think they backed down on that one, maybe. Mm-hmm. But this is a problem, and it's getting headlines, and of course the easy answer is, and there must be some truth to this, right? That's because of all of this woke crap. You try to brainwash a bunch of guys, as you just described, a bunch of guys who just want to fight, and now you got to put them through sensitivity training and all this stuff, and they just don't want anything to do with it. But you're saying, what, is that part of it at all or not?
I would say that it's definitely part of it, right? It's part of like the background noise of why a person wants to join the military, right? Like, when you're talking about the sorts of people that they're looking for, right? In large part, they're looking for people who are committed, patriotic, that want to be involved in kind of the camaraderie. And I'm talking about like the ideal candidates, not who ends up actually joining, right? And they want people who are basically committed to doing violence on behalf of the state. And those types of people tend to be, in our kind of current world, kind of right-leaning conservative people. And there's lots of surveys and data that show that the vast majority of, or it might not be the vast majority, but a large majority of military, especially the Army and combat arms, come from the South, and they come from conservative leaning areas. So that's definitely in the background noise of people's decisions to join the military. But
Well, and by the way,
one of the things I
on
talk
that
about,
point,
yeah.
just how woke is the Army and how woke is the Marine Corps these days anyway? And what is
I
it? What
think
exactly does that mean? I mean, is there really like it's like going to Brown University to go to boot camp?
so. No, it's not like that. It's more like it's. I would say that the military follows many of the other institutions in America by maybe a decade or so. So what's happened in recent years is that the what's effectively the HR department of the Army is kind of finally starting to adopt some of the things that have been around in corporate America for 10 or so years, where you do get sensitivity training. There is that kind of stuff. And most soldiers, I would say, they don't really necessarily, they might grumble about it a little bit, but this transformation has been going on for over a decade. I mean, you remember Obama got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was the first kind of major, I would say, major event that you could point to as evidence of this transformation occurring. But it's not like going to Brown University. There's still a lot of, high intensity kind of, culture and stuff like that trails it considerably. But that's not the stuff that goes on TV. And a lot of people see the stuff that the big public pronouncements and take that as the what's going on, and maybe it will be in 5 years. Who knows?
Yeah, pretty easy answer. And I guess all other things being equal, I can imagine some heavy eye rolling at being inculcated with a bunch of leftist doctrine about identity politics and this and that crap. But as a means to an end. As far
Exactly.
as
Yeah.
I still get to drive a
Hmm.
tank, right? I mean, we're
It's
talking
kind of
about boys;
That's
they don't
exactly
care,
right.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like it's kind of things that are People tend to think of it as like distractions from the other stuff. I'm still jumping out of airplanes. I'm still driving tanks and shooting machine guns and stuff, and that's my real mission. That's kind of how most
which
normal
sounds
soldiers think
great if
about it.
it was just peacetime and we weren't, actually, fighting all the time for nothing. I want to jump out of things.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I've been skydiving a couple times and it's really a lot of fun. And what I really want to do? I want to fly F-18 like a Top Gun, but I
Yeah,
just don't want to
absolutely.
shoot anything at anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of so in if that was all we were doing, it might be one thing. But that's kind of what you're always planning to do and always training to do, is to actually go out there and fight. And many soldiers do kind of feel like an urge to go out and do what they've been training for. But the reality of it is that it turns out that the past couple of decades have taken a serious toll on our fighting men and women, and have kind of shown them that it's not all it's not all heroism and movies and high fiving when you land back on the aircraft carrier.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to wrap up on the woke part there, that to me, it's just a silver lining if people say, I don't want government employment of any kind. If it means I got to sit there and listen to all of this leftist crap, then good. They should all get real jobs because we actually don't have any real enemies. We'll let them know when we need them. But so that to me is just, silver lining on this crazy, ideological storm running through here. But so to the real point, though, is what you just said, which is that actually we got a generation of catastrophe in the Middle East. And even though TV is turned away, a lot of guys have noticed, including the millions of Americans who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, especially, and back. And plus just, know of all of the CIA and Air Force and whoever's antics in Yemen and Libya and Syria, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you're exactly right. After doing this for 20 years and being in this kind of brutal conflict and seeing horrifying things, it ends up taking a toll on people. There's a tremendous amount of damage that has been occurred to the U.S. military as a result of our involvement in here. And so one of the things I talk about in my article, and that's borne out by data, actually on the same day that my article was published, a fantastic article by Zero Hedge came out, giving some data about who joins the military and why. And so, for example, one of the statistics cited in it is that about 79% of recruits have a relative who have served in the military. Now, one of the other things that's noted in this article is that the number of people who recommend serving in the military to a relative has decreased, and the number in the past couple of years, and the number of people who do not recommend joining the military to a relative has increased. So we've got this narrowing, and that's just in the past couple of years since 2019. So we've got this dynamic where people who have relatives in the military or friends and close associates and role models who are in the military are giving them kind of a balanced view about what military life actually means for a potential young recruit. Mm-hmm. When you're a young guy, right, or a young guy or girl, right, and you're thinking about joining the military, you're doing it kind of really for one of two reasons, and this is borne out by the data also. You're either doing it because you are committed and you want to serve in the military, you want to serve your country, right, or you're doing it because the kind of pecuniary benefits, right? You get your college paid for, you get a guaranteed paycheck. Maybe you have a relative or a spouse or a child that needs medical care. In fact, there's a new movie on Netflix that just came out where I haven't watched it yet, but that's the whole premise, is that somebody joins the military so that they can get health care. And that happens more than I can tell you. And people stay in for that long for that same reason. So, those are the kind of the two reasons that people join the military. And among people that are motivated to serve the country, that's hugely influenced by their role models, right? So growing up, I was surrounded by and grew up in a community where there was a lot of fighter pilots and former Air Force and Navy aviators. And those guys, man, like those are some real cool dudes, like you were talking about, like real life fighter pilots, and they kind of are the platonic ideal of what being a service member looks like. And so, if I had and talking with them, I got that experience of, the military, has all these things, and you get all these opportunities and you get to do cool stuff, so I got to see a lot of the positive side. But now that the war on terror has progressed so long and so many people have so many injuries, both physical and psychological, it's started to trickle out into the kind of public sphere and into the kind of Overton window that, hey, maybe serving in the military isn't all, medals and ribbons, right? Maybe there's the real serious likelihood that I could be harmed. In the NBC article that I cite, one of the things that they mention as a concern is that in the Army's internal surveys, it notes that more than half of young Americans who answered the survey, about 57%, think they would have emotional or psychological problems after serving in the military. Then, hilariously, the Army responds to that data with essentially hand waving, saying, well, they're just not familiar with what military service actually contributes. To me, that's kind of a non sequitur. How can it both be true that almost 80% of people have a relative who served and they're unfamiliar with it? It just doesn't make sense to me. But what else can the military respond with? How else can they explain this dramatic decline in the past couple of years and really the past decade of recruitment?
Yeah, it's not all the anti-war propaganda on TV, right? People are getting this information, just like you are saying there, from their own family members, just as the polls document, you know?
Absolutely. And think about after 9/11, for example, there was an enormous recruiting push, and even through and enormous numbers of people joining the military, with the media drumming it up. And even during the early parts of the Iraq war and Afghan war, recruiting didn't suffer until things started to get really bad. Now we have a real conflict going on in Ukraine and with Russia that threatens to spill out, and you've got the media banging the war drums constantly. Same thing in Taiwan, but people aren't responding to it. Why aren't they joining? Well, might be because they understand a little bit better what military service is about, and maybe they don't believe in it in the same way that or they don't feel the same level of patriotic duty to defend Ukraine or Taiwan from aggression.
Give me just a minute here. Listen, I don't know about you guys, but part of running the Libertarian Institute is sending out tons of books and other things to our donors. And who wants to stand in line all day at the post office? But stamps.com? Sorry, but their website is a total disaster. I couldn't spend another minute on it. But I don't have to either, because there's easyship.com. Easyship.com is like stamps.com, but their website isn't terrible. Go to scotthorton.org/easyship. Hey, y'all, Scott here. You know, the Libertarian Institute has published a few great books. Mine, Fool's Errand, Enough Already, and The Great Ron Paul. 2 by our executive editor, Sheldon Richman, Coming to Palestine, and What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. And of course, No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg, our late great co-founder and managing editor at the Institute. Coming very soon in the new year will be the excellent Voluntarist Handbook, edited by Keith Knight, a new collection of my interviews about nuclear weapons, 1 more collection of essays by Will Grigg, and 2 new books about Syria by the great William Van Wagenen and Brad Hoff and his co-author, Zachary Wingard. That's libertarianinstitute.org/books.
Yeah, well, so it was funny. I was talking with Matt Taibbi about this earlier, and he was joking about how, the liberals, I was talking about how the liberals won't go fight. It's all the right-wingers who go and do the fighting, and if they don't believe it anymore, that's a real problem for the war machine. And he was joking, yeah, now the liberals, they go on to be officers, so haha, that's a dig at you, dude. But
Yeah.
no, so you went to West Point and became a captain, but your intent was to go out there and fight, and then I know you saw some ugly stuff in Afghanistan. Was it just the airport, or you were in Afghanistan for how long?
So I was in the 82nd Airborne's activation to respond and complete the evacuation. I was there for a total of 14 days, and it was the longest 2 weeks of my life. And I was on the second to last plane out of Afghanistan.
Wow, man. And that was enough for you, huh?
There was a lot of reasons for me deciding to leave the military. That was definitely one of them. I'll point people to my other article that I wrote about it. It was pretty. There was a lot that happened. It was pretty traumatic. I'm proud of my soldiers, and what they did, but and what we accomplished with what we had. But it was kind of a disaster already. We did the best with what we had.
Yeah. That's so interesting. You're just seeing the very last chapter of that generation-long catastrophe up close like that, Really interesting take there.
It was, it probably would have happened like that no matter when we got out, whether it was 5 years ago or 5 years from now. But, it just, I happened to be there at the wrong time in the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of the fact that a lot of veterans listen to this show and like it, and I've made a lot of friends that way. And, I haven't had anybody say, nah, man, I've been to the war and back, and you don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's never happened yet. And it's always the other way around. In fact, I met a guy in San Marcos at a speech I gave to the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus. And he said he was a officer in Special Operations Forces, like essentially this whole time, stationed in the Gulf there somewhere. And he said he read my book, and he said, he could vouch for almost all of it, and the rest of it, he was thankful that he learned that stuff from me, and that was it. But so that ought to tell you a lot, because I'm not a vet and I'm not a guy who's been to the wars. I'm essentially a pirate radio host and, Raimondo's sidekick at antiwar.com, who just paid attention to this stuff and opposed it all this whole time. And then, what I got to say to these guys rings true. That this is, and I guess to you, this is this is what's really going on here, guys. Sorry.
It is. And so, they you are able to discuss with a clarity things that are very difficult for soldiers to talk about themselves or to acknowledge themselves. With many of the soldiers and veterans that I spent nearly all of my time in the military, in the combat arms and in the infantry. And if I wasn't in the infantry, then I was in the 82nd Airborne Division doing, kind of high speed stuff. But it kind of always fell into like two camps, as far as people's opinion on, the things that they had done. And so for frame of reference, my term of service was from the early 2010s until, just earlier this year. So, the one camp is people who knew and were troubled by their like experiences and the things that they did. And, I keep saying I need to break that habit. But the things that the U.S. military did overseas, and, went along with it because it's their job and they like it. They like their job. They like the camaraderie and stuff and being part of a community. Or B, the people who knew it was terrible and just didn't care. I'll always remember one, discussion with a soldier that I had, an NCO who, I was talking to him about it, and, he was like, man, I really want to go back to Afghanistan. And I was like, what, really? Why do you want to go back? And he was like, man, I just love fighting. And so it's like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's a reason, even if it's not a good reason. And,
all we got left, it sure as hell ain't fighting for freedom here or women's rights there or any of that crap. So it must be something. It's that this guy wants to shoot at something. Okay.
And so, and that
send him to the range, man.
That is some people, that's not everybody. That was far from normal. And that's why I remember it. But there's a large number of people who are upset with the things that they've done or the things that they've experienced. And, I'm like, what kind of, and that leads out to bears on the recruiting problem too, where like, hey, well, like, if somebody's in a small town, right, and they know somebody's father is a veteran or whatever, and they struggle with or are openly critical of the wars and the things that they've done, what kind of message does that send to a person who might otherwise want to join the military?
Yeah.
Maybe they'd end up being better off working on an oil rig or something else.
They might be, completely stoic about it too, but still recognize the truth of it all. You don't necessarily have to carry around a bag of guilt all the time that you believed your president and your dad and your gym coach and everybody told you this was the right thing to do, And we're talking about 17 and 18-year-old boys, which as a 46-year-old, I can tell you, is still just a kid. So regardless of, the technicality, I remember when I turned 18 thinking I was a grown up now, but that's kind of silly when I think back on it now. So anyway, I certainly don't hold individual soldiers responsible for American foreign policy, but it is important that we take the opportunity to make sure that kids do have the opportunity to know better. And I have met people who have told me that they were going to join the Army. In fact, they were even in some cases days or weeks away from joining the Army, and then they found out about my stuff and then decided not to. So I really like those too.
It's a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. I wonder if you can remark about this. I think I babbled about this in a recent interview, so sorry if I'm being redundant, everybody. But isn't it weird how there's this kind of bifurcation where even if Bill Clinton or W. Bush or Obama or Trump or Biden or somebody like that is your president, And even though everybody knows the wars are all BS, and even though everybody knows that the greatest conspiracy theory of all was coined by Ike Eisenhower, the 5-star general turned 2-term most highly respected president, or second place after FDR, I guess, most respected president of the 20th century, who said that, yeah, the arms industries have an interest in keeping the wars going, if you understand and take my meaning here. And everybody knows that that's the American system, that our government's completely captured by the arms industry and all of that. And for that matter, our media and all the think tanks are too. And everybody knows it. And yet, the whole thing about olive green and red, white, and blue and serving your country, and your granddad did it too, and honor and valor and all the martial virtues of being a tough guy who protects weaker people and all this Superman stuff. All that stuff is still true anyway, even though everybody knows that we got an empire and everybody knows that our system is completely corrupt and everybody knows that our commanders in chief are scum, not, worth. I mean, what would you hire them for if you were in business? Any of these guys, but you'll follow them into war with a foreign nation, and it's just, it's this, to me, even for a teenager, I think that there's got to be some real dissonance there. Like somewhere you heard before that it is not supposed to be like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, there's still going to be people, 17, 18 years old who are going to, they hear those things, but a lot of that is kind of, and to them, it's almost like, that's why I say it's kind of background, right? It's all background to their decision, where it's still very highly personal.
That's the adult's problem, right? Yeah, that's the democracy's problem. For you, it's whether you can do enough push-ups to make the cut, right? That's all it's about, is your own movie that you're starring in, right?
And I want to join, because, I get to get out of the house, I get to get out of my situation, and that's the case for lots of people.
Right.
And really, even like, we're just talking about the enlisted folks on this,
right.
Officers have a kind of different rationale for joining. I would say, one of the jobs that I did in the military was I was a trainer for the officer candidate school, which is where you would go if you were an enlisted person trying to become an officer or didn't go to ROTC or a service academy. And I would say that probably, all the people that were coming to become an officer were doing it for career reasons, rather than just like purely economic ones. A lot of people had college debt and stuff like that, which is one way the military gets people in. And in fact, actually, I don't know if you remember, but one of the things that people talked about with when the forgiving student loan kind of drama was going on a few months ago, the military came out and said, whoa. I don't know if we should go forward with this because it might impact our ability to get people to join the military if we forgive student loans. So right. It's, they realize we're relying on desperate people to fill the ranks, and, it's kind of it's just kind of a mess, and especially senior officers have an extremely perverse incentive to continue continue wars and things, because where do those senior officers get jobs after they get out of the military? They go straight into that military industrial complex. It kind of is a tricky thing, and it's hard to extricate that and break that cycle for people.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, and you can see too where there was such a financial incentive in boosting this Ukraine war that, look, oh no, we pulled out of Afghanistan. I think it leaked that the CEO of Raytheon complained on his investor conference call that, man, we're really taking a hit with the end of the Afghan war here. We're looking for opportunities, and then lo and behold, hey, look, an opportunity. And we got complete consensus and tons of cash being passed around. The Quincy Institute just actually ran a great thing about the Ukraine lobbyists. But where's all that money coming from? That's our money in the first place, most of it,
And it's another great irony as well, is that, something you've talked about before, where you've said that you're concerned that pulling out of Afghanistan and the Middle East would free up resources for other wars.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? that's where we are.
Yeah.
And now we're running the risk of all those soldiers dying in a nuclear holocaust instead of just, getting stuck in deploying
Man, I
and
never
shooting
could
at
have wrote
peasants.
that book.
I wouldn't take too much credit. I think they've got some incentives of their own to have ended those wars. But you've definitely impacted people like me and the sorts of people who matter.
Well, I hope that's right. And yeah, I really hope that I didn't play a role in getting all of humanity killed. But that is something, honestly, that I consider that from the time I was, even before I got too interested in being an activist of any kind. I was still just a teenager, probably, or like very early 20s. They're like, yeah, you never really know what's going to happen. And you could see pretty easily that, like, having our military, if they absolutely have to be doing something, and I cannot turn that off, maybe it is better that they're patrolling helpless Pashtuns in the Helmand province than picking a fight with a major power that can hit us all back the way that they are. Not that it's fair to sacrifice these poor people, but now look at where we're at. We could end up killing hundreds of millions of people in a day in a war with Russia,
Yep. And it could, there's so many different ways that it could spiral out of control.
Yep. Well, listen, actually, why don't you give us a word about that? How's tensions in Poland these days, man?
So a lot of that, I was there for a relatively brief time for the first month or two, during the initial part of the invasion. And it was a pretty intense. I won't go into specifics about it. But it was pretty intense for a couple of weeks. And then after that, it kind of became clear that whatever we went over there to do, we were not going to do. And I don't know exactly what those details were. I was far too low on the chain to understand what was happening back there. But the bigger point is that there's a lot of soldiers there, and there's a lot of people that are ready in the event that something gets worse. And that's as long as they're there, that increases the possibility that things get worse. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yep. Have mercy. Hope not. Listen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you writing for the Institute, John, and for coming on the show. It's great stuff.
Thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate it.
All right, you guys, that is former Army captain, now retired, John Vaughn, writing at the Libertarian Institute. A veteran explains why people aren't joining the military.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.